Vampires, Nosferatu, the kings of the night. These legendary night crawlers have cemented their place in the collective conscious of humanity, growing and sucking on our lifeblood since time immemorial. And whether you like your vampires creepy, pretty, or with big titty, you better believe that Papa Konami will take your favorite undeads and make as much money off of them as possible. Vampires as a concept have existed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Since about the early 2000s. It has taken several years and two major overhauls for these bloodsuckers to get the treatment that they so rightly deserve. Owing to this, we'll be needing to look at a whole lot of them from the very beginning in order to paint the full portrait that is Konami's take on the Castlevania series. Starting us off, we are going to be taking a look at the original founder of all vampires, that being the dapper Vampire Lord, a level 5 dark zombie with 2000 attack and 1500 defense, which states that if it inflicts battle damage to the opponent, you can declare a card type. Your opponent then sends a card of that type from their deck to the grave. And once per turn during the next standby after this card gets destroyed by your opponent's card effect, then you can special summon it back from the graveyard. There's a few different cards of this archetype that are going to have a similar effect to hit your opponent's deck, which I will from now on be calling the Vamp effect in order to save some time. But of course, we take a look at the Vampire Lord and see what vampires were originally meant to be. Big beat stick sort of monsters that have the ability to not only club over your opponent's inferior creatures, but also start taking a bite out of your life force in order to make you succumb to their absolute drip. In fact, Vampire Lord is such a goated monster from, what, like 2005, 4 or something on there, that not only is this card semi-limited in the Fabled Goat format, it's also used by Seto Kaiba, and if there's a card that Seto Kaiba uses, it's probably a pretty damn good card. However, of all the vampires, this one really shows its age pretty roughly. The biggest issue with the Vampire Lord is not the fact that getting rid of cards in your opponent's deck is a bad thing, so much as this game has evolved to such a state that you never want to send cards from your opponent's deck to the grave, much less giving them the option of what card they send. There's so many different monsters in this game that can revive themselves from the grave or being used from the grave as material for other things that you're never going to want to send monsters to the grave. People don't play so many traps nowadays, and the few that do are either things that can recover themselves or extended plays or what have you may. And spells, well, originally I would say the best thing to be sending with this card's effect have also gained all the graveyard effects. So you see, hand, the graveyard, they're the same thing nowadays. So Vampire Lord, back in the day, you could make an argument for hitting out the cards in your opponent's deck with this guy, but the years have not been kind to our Vampiric Lord. He might need to go back into the coffin for a nap, to be honest, because there's really no good reason to be hitting your opponent's deck with a thing like this, unless you had some really consistent way to steal the cards out of your opponent's graveyard. Continuing on the line, of course, if we have a Lord, we must have a Vampire Lady. Is a level 4 dark zombie with 1550 attack and defense, which, when it inflicts battle damage to the opponent, applies the Vamp effect. So basically, Lady is what you get when you really want to play Vampire Lord Turbo but are too lazy to put in a bloody tribute engine. Don't get me wrong, having a normal summonable version of your boss monster essentially is not a bad thing to have. It just seems such a lazy design. I mean, this is a Vampire Lady. She don't even have big titties. What am I supposed to do with this thing? I don't know, but the thing is, this is a card that you could make a deck around this, maybe pump it up with a whole bunch of equips, something like a Samurai Benkei combo, something of that nature. But at this point in the age of this card, you probably just play Mahavilo over this thing. Don't even think about it. Next up, we have Vampire's Curse, which is a level 6 dark zombie with 2000 attack, 800 defense, which once returned during the standby phase after he is destroyed by battle and sent to the grave, you can pay 500 life points to summon him from the grave and give him a 500 point attack boost. So what exactly is the point of Vampire's Curse? I mean, don't get me wrong, a big beat stick back in the early 2000s is not that bad, but why not just play Summon Skull? He looks more intimidating and everything. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love to tribute set monsters just so my opponent can run them over for a slightly bigger beat stick the next turn, but there's really just no reason to play this guy. And what's with the effect of reviving himself anyway? It's like you take this dude, you combine him with the vampire lady with the fusion dance, and you get Vampire Lord. Is that the lore here? Is that the actual lore? I wouldn't be surprised if that was the actual lore. So yeah, Vampire's Curse. He looks cool, but he does not intimidate nearly as much as he thinks he does. Moving right along, we get a little tip from the GX era, that being Vampire Genesis, a level 8 dark zombie with 3,000 attack and 2,100 defense, which can't be normal summoned or set and has to be first summoned from the hand by banishing a dark vampire lord that you control. And once per turn, you can discard a zombie to the grave to target a zombie with a level less than that discard monsters and summon it back out. This guy he's okay. He's a straight upgrade to an extent over the Vampire Lord. He's kind of like the Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon of zombies in the olden days, although one could argue that there's a certain other boy who should be taking that sort of position. But Vampire Genesis isn't technically awful. It is the ability to just revive any of your zombies as long as you discard something bigger. Mind you that most vampires, until we get into the later series, are about the same level already. So not as useful in terms of vampirism, and you know, it's okay. It's an okay card. It's a product of its time. It had its own structure deck. You gotta give Vampire Genesis something, man. You got yourself Vampire Hunter next, a level 4 Dark Warrior, who destroys any dark monster that he battles at the start of the damage step, which is not really a vampire card. He's more of a Castlevania reference. Belmont be looking swag, but he's no vampire. The last member of the OG vampires, of course, we're taking a look at Vampire Baby. This is a level 3 dark zombie with 700 attack and 1,000 defense, which at the end of the battle phase, if he destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can summon that monster to your field. Now, this thing is it's creepy as hell. I don't know what the combination of blue eyes and red moon, pretty creepy. I'm pretty sure it used to be called Red Moon Baby back before they changed into a vampire. But just the idea of going into a battle phase with this little cretin on the board and he just like starts jumping and mauling people in the throat is definitely something vampires would do. Yeah, you have to give it. He may not look like much, but he does have the fangs and he has the cloak. He looks like a vampire. He's got that crazy hairdo. He's got a crazy hairdo. This does remind me though more of the Vampire Lady. Again, another small vampire that you just want to pump full of equip cards and like let it go. Maybe combine this with Twin Swords of Flashing Light to steal multiple monsters. I think that would work. I don't know, but it's certainly interesting. Let's put it that way. So after the initial rush of Vampire Sport, Konami decided to cool their jets on the insane amount of vampire plays. Let's be real. Vampire Lord, too strong. But, you know, at some point in the intervening years, once we finally get into the Zexal era, Konami decided to throw these old vagabonds a bone. And thus we got the first line of their support, beginning with the very nice Vampire's Sorcerer, which is a level 4 dark zombie with 1,500 attack and defense, which, with this card in your possession is sent to the grave by the opponent, you can add a dark vampire monster or a vampire spell trap from your deck to the hand, and you can banish this card from the grave to allow a dark vampire to be normal summoned without a tribute. This is the beginning of vampires becoming a true archetype. It's always a better archetype when you give yourself a pretty nice searcher. And Vampire Sorcerer is a good searcher. He does have to leave the board because of the opponent, but this could be any means, by battle, by card effect, what have you. And it searches your entire lineup, even into the modern day. It adds all the vampire monsters, and it adds all the vampire spell traps. So, Sorcerer, despite its age, is still a competent card, and he does look pretty fine with that drippy wizard cosplay he's got. I'm not sure where those fingers are. Is that part of Vampire Genesis? Did they rip Genesis's wings off and decorate himself with it? That's pretty badass, I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, so Vampire Sorcerer is a very nice monster, and you know, in a modern sense, he's not as competent, but you know, you could conceivably run a copy or two of Sorcerer if you happen to want to have just that little extra bit of consistency. And also, he makes it so that all tribute summons are optional. Next up on the list, we have Shadow Vampire, which is a level 5 dark zombie with 2,000 attack, 0 defense, like a proper zombie is supposed to have, which cannot be used as Xyz material except for that of a dark Xyz monster. When normal summoned, you can special summon a dark vampire monster from the hand of the deck except for himself, but the monsters you control cannot attack for the rest of the turn except for that special summon monster. Shadow Vampire is a very nice addition to the vampire lineup, giving you that swarm option that the vampires at this point had lacked. The Vampire of the Shadows, he brings out any of the vampires from the deck, and this being the beginning of Zexal era, this allows you to easily turbo out a level 5 monster for a quick and easy rank 5 play. Admittedly, you can't attack, and admittedly he only makes dark monsters, but there's enough of a pool of decent level 5 or rank 5 Xyz monsters that Shadow Vampire can put in the work. I also really like that he's got like the ghost of a shield on his arm and he has 0 defense. That's very funny to me. I like that. I really like that little detail there. But yes, in terms of modern play, you don't see this guy as much anymore, but you could conceivably run a copy of Shadow Vampire just for shits and giggles. There's no reason not to give it a shot. And he puts in the work for the early stages of what vampires would eventually become. Next up, we have the best buddy of the Shadow Vampire, which is the Vampire Duke, another level 5 dark zombie with 2,000 attack, 0 defense, a proper zombie, which again can't be used as Xyz material except for a dark Xyz monster. When normal summoned, he can target a dark vampire monster in your grave and summon that monster in defense mode. When he himself is special summoned, you apply the vamp effect. This is the monster that goes hand in hand with Shadow Vampire and is in fact one of the only vampires that from now on will be applying this vamp effect, but it is a very nice monster. He has that applicability. You can special summon him, and then he does the vamp effect. If he's normal summoned, remember, tribute summons are optional, then he will revive a monster himself. So he's basically Shadow Vampire 2.0. He has that versatility. He has the drip. This man looks, okay, quick thing. This guy's artwork is completely different from every other vampire in the entire archetype, and he looks like the most vampire-y vampire of them all. He looks more vampire. He's a straight up Dracula. This is just, it looks like a magic card. This looks like a magic monster more than a Yu-Gi-Oh monster. But yes, Vampire Duke is a nice monster. You use him and the Shadow Vampire, you go to town, you make your Xyz monsters, and you also start hitting your opponent's deck. A quick detour before we get into the rest of the main deck monsters. I think we should explain why are we still doing the vamp effect if it's not so good to do. Well, that's where we take a look at the Vampire's Kingdom, a field spell that states that zombie monsters gain 500 attack during the damage calculation only, and once per turn when a card is sent from your opponent's deck to the grave, you can target a card on the field and send a dark vampire from your hand or deck to the grave, and if you do, you destroy that target. So finally, some payoff to what vamps are trying to do that works during both players' turns. It doesn't require any more setup than having itself on the board. Your opponent's cards get sent to the grave either by your vamp effect or by your opponent's own card effect, and then by simply sending a vampire from your hand or the deck to the grave, you can pop an opponent's card and interrupt their flow. It's a little slow by modern standards, but the ability to have that interactivity on your opponent's turn as well as additional disruption on your turn is nothing to scoff at. It's a competent card. It's really lovely artwork. I really, it gives me Resident Evil vibes. It really does. It really does. It reminds me of Resident Evil. So you got Vampire Kingdom. It's a nice field spell that gives the vamp effect some sort of applicability in the modern day. You know what I mean? I know most vampire players prefer their zombie world, but let's have some originality, folks. Baladrox should not be the only boss monster that zombies have to field, okay? You can have more options, I'm telling you. Rise up, my vampire brothers, and play the Vampire Kingdom. So, what is the Xyz monster that you might be wondering that we're summoning out using our Shadow and our Duke? Well, that would be the first Xyz monster that the vampires possess, being the Crimson Knight Vampire Brahm, a rank 5 dark zombie with 2,500 attack and 0 defense. True zombie! which can detach a material from himself to target a monster in the opponent's graveyard, summoning that monster to your field, but only that monster can attack for the rest of the turn. You can only use this effect once per turn, and once per turn during the standby phase, the next turn this card gets destroyed by the opponent's card, you can summon him in defense mode. Now, Braum is an interesting one in terms of how useful he really is. Being able to steal your opponent's cards is always a good thing. However, Braum, it really depends on what your opponent is using to determine how good Braum is. Obviously, you're using the vamp effect in order to mill out your opponent, make them dump their monsters, which you're hoping to steal from them. That is the idea and the concept of this card. But if your opponent just dumps a bunch of, like, hand traps that they don't need, then you're just reviving a bunch of hand traps that are on your board and don't do half as much as they normally would do. Braum being able to steal stuff really would make the most sense if that monster could still attack. Although, you could argue that Braum's stolen victims, they do retain their attack points, they do retain their abilities, all that good stuff. So, again, depending on what your opponent's using, depending on what they have, Braum is either completely useless or he's actually pretty good, at least in terms of like a late game thing, you know? The bad thing, though, is that with Braum, if you're summoning him to a Shadow Vampire, Braum cannot attack, and neither can the monster that Braum brings back. So there's this desire for vampires to do damage, but their best player makers up to this point don't allow them to do that. So it's an interesting card. Playing it is really up to preference. In the olden days, that's what vampires had, that's what they used. Nowadays, you don't see Braum as much as better Xyz monsters in the deck, but if you wanted to run one in style points, there's nothing wrong with that. Although this man is holding a shield and he has 0 defense. Don't you lie to me, Braum. We all know that thing's made of cardboard. Put it down. Getting back into the last few main deck cards of the first wave of support of vampires, we of course find ourselves in the presence of Vampire Grace, which is a level 6 dark zombie with 2,000 attack and 1,200 defense, full zombie, which states that when a level 5 or higher zombie is summoned to your field by the effect of a zombie monster while this is in the grave, you can pay 2,000 life points to summon this card from your graveyard. You only use this effect once per turn, and once per turn, you can apply the vamp effect. Grace is a card that you want to send to your grave as early as humanly possible, and then just have her bring herself back out while you're in the middle of doing your combos. She does cost a pretty penny. It's a bit of a steep cost for this monster compared to everything else this deck has to offer, although it does lead into what will eventually happen with vampires to an extent. But Grace is not the worst thing vampires have ever produced. I mean, Spherish Lady technically counts as a vampire just because of, like, flavor text, so there you go. But Grace is a good monster all around in the fact that she's just an extra body on the board, and, you know, in terms of using Vampire Kingdom, she is a non-hard once per turn dump to opponent's grave. So before you ask, yes, if you are crazy enough, you could theoretically loop Vampire Grace 35 times in your first turn and mill your opponent out. That is technically possible, depending on what your opponent's running, of course. You could at least run out other monsters, let's put it that way. You can mill your opponent's entire monster pool, depending on what they're playing, but that's only for the maddest of lads. Next up, we take a look at the first wave of support's boss monster that they added to vampires, that being the Vampire Vamp, a level 7 dark zombie with a 2,000 attack and defense, which once per turn, when this card or a vampire is normal summoned to your field, lets you target a monster your opponent controls whose attack is higher than Vampire Vamp's and equip it to her. She gains attack equal to the combined original attack of the monsters equipped to her by this effect, and if she happens to get destroyed or whatever is sent to the graveyard while equipped with a card by this effect, you can special summon her back. Vampire Vamp it's a nice card. I've made old decks around her. I mean, she's like a vampire that steals your opponent's will to live. She is there to entice the opponent's monster over to the side of the undead, steal their will to live, and then benefit off of their power. You might say she's less a vampire and more of something else, but no, she's got some fangs in there somewhere. So yes, Vampire Vamp, a very nice monster for vampires. Again, tribute summoning is optional in the deck. So you keep out the vampire you normal summon some vampires, you steal your opponent's big monsters. It's a nice little bit of something. It is a targeted card effect, but it is non-destruction removal that keeps cards out of your opponent's graveyard. So, you know, Vampire Vamp, pretty good. And I just want to mention with this artwork that she seems to be asking me to come closer. Like she wants to tell me something. Something important, perhaps. But as for monsters in this first wave, we have Vampire Dragon, which is not really a vampire monster. I'm pretty sure this is just a vampire by name, and it's part of the archetype, but it does nothing for it. But Vampire Dragon does allow you to search out any level 4 lower monster when he gets tribute summoned and then sent to the graveyard. So it's really just a card for any deck. Last for the first wave of support, we take a look at Vampire's Takeover, a normal trap that states that if you have no cards in your field zone and all face-up monsters you control are zombies, you can activate Vampire Kingdom from your deck and then summon a Dark Vampire from your grave in defense mode. But you can only activate one of these cards per turn. So what's the deal with a vampire card called Vampire Takeover that does not allow you to take anything over? I get the idea that you're taking over the residents, the livelihoods and all that by establishing your vampire's domain, but it doesn't let you steal stuff. It doesn't let you steal anything. There's only one vampire up to this point that does anything when special summoned, being the Duke. So I don't even know why Vampire Sorcerer is there. I know he's the GOAT, but come on, he has nothing to do with special summoning himself. It's a card. It does let you search out your field spell. It does allow you to basically pop a card of your opponents. I would recommend something like Regeki Break if you wanted something like that in this deck, but as it stands, Vampire Takeover, not that great. So with the first line of support done, what do vampires look like? Significantly closer to a proper archetype. They do have a nice searcher, they got some swarming options, they got the ability to make use of their vamp effect, and they have some nice new boss monsters. However, at this point in the game, Konami kind of undersold what vampires should have been doing. The game was evolving at such a fast pace that honestly, being able to poke your opponent with the Vampire Kingdom wasn't really going to do much for the vampires, and so they kind of sat in this morass of not very good for quite a long time, until some blessed soul over at Konami decided, I want sexy vampires. I want better vampire support. And that's exactly what we inevitably got, with the second and most impressive lineup of vampire support, starting of course with the two monsters known as Vampire's Familiar and Vampire Retainer. Why are these two at the same time? Well, it's because they're very similar to each other. Familiar states that when he's special summoned, you can pay 500 life points to add a vampire monster from deck to hand except for himself, and Vampire Retainer states that when he's special summoned, you can pay 500 life points to add a vampire spell trap from your deck to your hand. Both then share the effect text that states that if this card is in the grave, you can send a vampire card from your hand or face up on the field to the grave to summon this card, but then banish it when it leaves the field. It's a very nice pair of monsters that, you know, they evolved from Vampire Sorcerer to be just a little bit quicker with their effects. And these two are perfect to be sent to the grave as early as possible. Foolish Burial, Unizombie, of course, being the OG ultimate zombie support, allowing you to get plenty of your familiars and retainers into the grave to be revived by simply discarding some of your vampires that you don't need or you want to be reviving later. Familiar, again, can search any of the vampires from your deck, and the retainer gets all your spells, and there's some nice new spells on top of that. And so, off to a good start. You have some monsters that can be brought out very quickly and easily. They can swing into each other. You summon out Familiar, you can send it to the graveyard to bring back Retainer, and then just plus for day. Keep on going, keep the train rolling for the vampires. Next up, we have the Vampire's Ghost Ogre, which is the level 3 Dark Zombie with 1500 attack and 0 defense, which, if this card's normal summoned, lets you send another vampire card from the hand or face up on the field to the grave to add a level 4 higher vampire from the deck to the hand, and if you do, you send a level 2 or lower vampire monster from your deck to the grave. And during the main phase, as a quick effect, you can banish this card from the grave and pay 500 to then normal summon a vampire monster. You can only use both these effects once per turn. Now, unlike other ghost ogres that may or may not exist in this game, Ghost Ogre is not a hand trap, but he is a nice search room option as well as a great card for setting up the graveyard. With the simple cost of ditching any vampire card from, the field or the hand, he cannot send, himself to the grave, but he can send anybody else. But Ghost Ogre lets you set up the graveyard, search any of your cards, and then you go to town and send another card to the graveyard. There you go. You get Vampire Ghost, and you discard either Retainer or Familiar, and then send the opposite to the grave. You can search a card, and then search 2 more cards. So it's so much options for the vampire. You get pluses for days. Plus on top of that, he retains the memory of our Vampire Sorcerer. He allows us for normal summoning as a quick effect. You can normal summon on your opponent's turn. There you go. Get a free normal summon. Summon Vampire Shadow and then summon the Duke. There you go. That is technically something you can do. So already with this first bit of support, we're seeing explosive searching power, the sort of thing that vampires have been needing. But what's the point of searching unless you're searching out some nice big new bosses? So starting off with that, we have a Vampire Crimson, a level 5 dark zombie with 2,000 attack, 1,400 defense, which states that if a monster you control will be destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, you can pay 1,000 life points for each of those cards instead. And you must protect all monsters that would be destroyed if you use this effect, however. And at the end of the battle phase, this card destroys any monsters by battle. You can summon them from your graveyards to your field. Crimson is the first step to vampires changing their entire gameplay for the better. Rather than be relying on the vamp effect, vampires are becoming closer to a proper beatdown deck that they were always meant to be, combined with the ability to steal your opponent's stuff, combined with the use of their new mechanic, and that is using life points as the resource. As life points can be inferred as lifeblood, of course the vampires are going to be using that lifeblood in order to fuel their atrociousness. Crimson is a nice monster to set on your board and use it to protect all your vampires from any of those nasty lightning storms or, priests or anything of that nature, as well as being the monster that you want to have run over your opponent's bosses whenever humanly possible, because then you just get to steal the opponent's monsters. It's an amazing card. It doesn't even negate the effects of the things it steals. So Crimson, while maybe not the monster that most people go for in vampires, it's not a bad card by any stretch of the imagination. It's actually pretty good. What's even more good, however, is the next member, Vampire Fraulein, a level 5 dark zombie with a 2,000 defense, 600 attack, which states that when a monster declares an attack, any monster, you can special summon this card from the hand in defense mode. You only use this effect once per turn, and once per battle, if a zombie monster battles an opponent's monster, during damage calculation, you can pay life points in multiples of 100, and then your monster will gain that much attack and defense during that damage calculation only. And at the end of the battle phase, if this card destroys a monster by battle, you can summon that monster from the grave to your field. Vampire Fraulein is the hand trap, not only for vampires, but for zombies in general. She's just able to summon herself out whether you're attacking or the opponent is, and she allows you to pay them sweet life points like little raindrops falling from the sky, from knocking off her umbrella, and then she just whips out and destroys your opponent's stuff. Destroys your opponent's monsters, allows you to steal those monsters back. It's a nice little thing that she can do. Now, she can only boost up to 3,000, but let's be real. Why would you need more than 3,000? That'd be a little crazy. But there is a good reason for that restriction, and it actually has to do with the next card that vampires can do, which is a Vampire's Domain, which I have to say, Crimson looking very fine right there. So we have this continuous spell that states that once per turn, you can pay 500 life points in order to normal summon a vampire in addition to your normal summoner set, even this card leaves the field. More importantly, though, is this next effect, which states that each time a vampire inflicts damage to the opponent, you gain that much life points. Aromage players beware, your life point gains are now mine. That's right. Vampires are tired of having to just, poke and prod at the opponent. No, when we want to take your blood, we're going to take your blood. We're like raiding a blood bank or something with the vampires now. That's right. With Domain on the board, you only need the one on the board. So long as your vampires are doing damage, even by a little bit of damage, you're gaining life points back. You're gaining so much life points. It makes Fraulein's effect so much more worth it, because as you're paying life points to boost yourself, Every time you're doing a damage to the opponent, you're gaining life points back. This allows your vampires to keep themselves hale and hearty, as a corpse could be hale and hearty, and just allows you to keep going. Keep destroying your opponent's stuff. Keep your life points flowing like a blood river. The blood river flowing through the field of vampires. So this is a card you definitely want to run. Next up, we have Vampire's Scarlet Scourge, a level 6 dark zombie monster, 2200 attack and defense, which states when he's normal special summon, you can pay 1,000 life points to target a vampire in the grave, except for himself, and summon it, but it cannot attack this turn. He only uses effect once per turn, and at the end of the battle phase, if this card destroys a monster by battle, you can summon it from the grave to your field. Oh, it's just like my boy, Vampire Duke. It's like Vampire Duke's, like, marginally more attractive son or something. But yeah, Scarlet Scourge is an amazing monster. He's a monster born on legs for vampires. Granted, the monster can't attack that you bring back, but that's totally fine. You don't use Scarlet Scourge's effect to bring back monsters for attacking. You're using it to make exceeds and stuff, for links and things, because there are exceeds and links in this deck. So, Scarlet Scourge is an amazing card just to build some field presence with. Plus, he lets you steal your opponent's stuff too, so that's always a plus. Next up, we have the Vampire's Red Baron, who retired from flying a plane so that he could ride a phantasmal horse. The level 6 dark zombie with 2400 attack and 1000 defense. Oh god, it's a freaking monarch card. And once per turn, you can pay 1000 life points to target a monster your opponent controls, and another vampire monster you control to switch control of those monsters. And at the end of the battle phase, if this card destroys a monster by battle, you can summon that monster from the graves to your field. Or you could just play creature swap. That is also a perfectly reasonable thing you can do. Vampire's Red Baron, not a terrible card in theory, but honestly, the deck has more impressive. This is more of a throwback to older times. Like I said, creature swap. This is creature swap in monster form. It's not a terrible card by any means, but it's not something that typically you'll see in vampires, unless you want to run it as a one-up for style points. Or frickin' play Vampire Monarchs, okay? Go ahead, it's not like Monarch players have anything better to play with anyway. The last main deck vampire monster to talk about is their biggest, baddest boy, which is Vampire Voivode, which is a level 8 dark zombie with 2000 attack and 2100 defense, which, when it is normal summoned, lets you target up to 2 monsters in the opponent's grave and summon those monsters to your field in defense mode, with their effects negated. When a monster effect is activated, while a monster with that same name is in either player's graveyard, you can negate that monster's activated effect. And if a monster is summoned from your opponent's graveyard, you can tribute 2 monsters to summon this guy from the grave. But you can only use each of these effects once per turn. Voivode is actually a pretty interesting monster. He's absolutely insane normal summoned. Remember, tribute summons are optional in this deck. He allows you to steal 2 of your opponent's monsters. Their effects do not get negated. However, there's actually really good reason to be stealing your opponent's monsters, as we'll be seeing in a minute. But Voivode allows you to steal 2 of your opponent's cards, denying them to the opponent. You can use them for whatever you want. But more importantly, he has that very nice secondary effect of negating cards with the same name in the graveyard. You know, if your opponent has hand traps, for example, if they try to ash you for the second time, then you can negate the second ash, or if you've ashed them once, then you can negate all their ash blossoms. It's a pretty nice thing. It basically punishes your opponent if they want to run multiples, or if you're in a mirror match. It's a pretty nice guy. And he can also special summon him from the graveyard, but that's a little costly in this deck, so that effect doesn't apply as often, but it is viable. It can be done. It just doesn't happen quite as often. But Voivode, very nice card. I wouldn't run more than one of the guy in the deck, but he's a good card. So next we gotta take ourselves a quick look at the spell trap lineup that vampires also have. We have Vampire's Desire. Oh boy. It's a normal spell that states that you can use one of these 2 effects. Target a face-up monster you control. Send a vampire from the deck to the grave with a different level. If you do, the targeted monster becomes that level until the end of the turn. Or you can target a vampire in the grave to send a monster you control to the grave, and then special summon the targeted monster. You only use one of these effects once per turn. But Vampire's Desire, it's a nice card for 2 different reasons. One, it's essentially Foolish Burial that is searchable in vampires. Lets you search out any of your vampires, send them to the graveyard to change a monster's level. This is great for making exceeds plays and the things, because we have a rank 5 and a rank 6 we'll get it to in a bit. And so it lets you set things up in the grave. It lets you set up your retainers and your familiars and your sorcerers and your ghosts and all sorts of things. Pretty good with the first effect. The second effect is just straight up monster born. So Vampire's Desire is a really powerful card for vampires. It has that versatility, gives you different options of what you can do with the thing. So there's no reason not to run it. Next up we have Vampire's Awakening, which is a normal trap card that wait, hold on one second. Why is there a vampire sleeping on a bed? What kind of proper vampire doesn't sleep in a coffin? That's weird. But anyway, this is a card that lets you special summon a vampire from the deck, destroys it in the end phase, and you can only activate this once per turn. Pretty basic card, just summons out a vampire from the deck. There's, originally not as many targets, but you can summon familiar, you can summon a retainer, you can summon, you can summon anyone you want. You just have to, lose it in the end of the turn. More often, you want to play this on your turn so that you can make use of said card, but you can really summon whoever, whenever. So it's not typically run, but you could. It's not a terrible option, just not as good of an option. The last main deck card for the vampires, of course, is one of their nastiest cards, which is Vampire Domination, something that the original Vampire Takeover really should have been. A counter trap that states when a spell, trap, or monster event is activated while you control a vampire, you negate that card's activation, and if you destroy it. And if it was a monster, you gain life points equal to the original attack of said monster, but you can only activate one domination per turn. This is, of course, the thing you want all the time. Stop your opponent from nuking your board or summoning big nasty cards or activating, I don't know, Max C for the 10th time in Master Duel, whatever you want to need to do. This card does it. This card negates anything your opponent wants, so long as you have a vampire. And if you're negating monsters, which like 90% of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is monster cards, then you're going to be getting a nice fat life point bonus that you can use for all your monsters' nasty, dirty deeds. So moving on to the final 4 monsters of the vampire lineup, the Extra Deck Special. We're taking a look at the first of their Exceeds monsters, the rank 6 Damper Vampire Sheridan. This is a very nice rank 6 dark zombie monster, 2600 attack and 1000 defense, which states that if you use monsters with a level owned by your opponent for the Exceed summon of this card, you can treat it as a level 6. Once per turn, you detach material from this card to target a card your opponent controls and send to the graveyard. And once per turn, if a monster card sent from the field to your opponent's grave by a card effect, or a monster is destroyed by battle and sent to your opponent's graveyard, you can detach material from this card to summon one of those monsters to your field in defense mode. Very, very nice monster, and you understand the whole idea of stealing your opponent's cards now. As long as you're using cards of your opponents, you only need one material of your own. You only need one level 6. And normally, the contrasting levels of this deck would be a little weird for Exceeds plays, but because of something like Sheridan, it doesn't matter. As long as you're stealing your opponent's stuff, you can just turn them into level 6s, and then you make this dude. And that's not even going into his very nice effect, where you can just detach a material, send an opponent's monster to the graveyard, and then use your other material, and then steal that monster to your board and do more things with it. It's a very nice monster, and he's the face of the vampire. Look at this guy, he's dapper as shit. Look at him. I don't even know, he sticks out like a sore thumb in the graveyard, but he's amazing. He's the star of the graveyard, that's what he is. Of course, we also have the penultimate vampire monster. That is right, the rank 8 Exceeds, the zombie vampire. Oh, thank you, Konami, for letting me know he was a zombie. I didn't know he was gonna be a zombie. Thanks for letting me know. It's a nice rank 8 dark zombie monster, 3000 attack, 2800 defense, with a pretty cool effect. If you use a monster with a level owned by your opponent for the Exceed summon of this card, you can treat it as a level 8. Neither player can target this card with effects of special summon monsters except those summoned from the graveyard. You can detach a material from this card. Each player sends the top 4 cards from their deck to the grave. Then if any monsters are sent to either grave by this effect, you can summon one of those monsters to your field, but you can only use this effect of the undead vampire once per turn. This guy is an absolute beast and a half. Any rank 8 deck can make this guy, because he's totally generic. He does not require zombies. It can be whoever you want. This gothic horror will descend from on high or down below, wherever he pops out of. Undead vampire will show up nuke both players' decks for 4 cards, and then just summon whoever he damn well pleases back to the board. Plus, he's immune to the effects of, well, he can't be targeted by the effects of monsters, except for those summoned from the grave. He's not immune to all of them, but he's immune to a good chunk of them, okay? He's immune to a good chunk to them. So, Undead Vampire, amazing card. I love him in Venoms, because you can make him in Venoms to help set things up. He's a gothic horror beauty that is the penultimate boss monster of the vampires. A little hard to make in vampires, to be honest, considering they only have, what, 2 level 8 monsters in the whole archetype. So making them is a little tricky, but you know, you have to steal multiple of your opponent's monsters to do it. But it's doable. It's certainly doable, so there's no reason not to do it. Getting down to the last 2, we take a look at the first of the links, Vampire Sucker. That's, well, who let the horny interns make card artwork this time? I don't know. But this is a Link 2 Dark Zombie with a 1600 attack. Needs 2 zombie monsters, and if you attribute summon a monster for a tribute summon, you can tribute a zombie your opponent controls, even though you don't control it. You can then use one of each of these effects of the Vampire Sucker per turn. You can target a monster at your opponent's graveyard to summon it to your opponent's field in defense mode, but it becomes a zombie monster. And if a zombie monster is special summoned from either grave, you get to draw a card. Vampire Sucker is pretty infamous. Not to deal with zombies, it's mostly because of her boyfriend, everyone's favorite snake wizard man. But yeah, Vampire Sucker is a very much a staple of modern zombie playstyle, because you're summoning a lot in zombies. You special summon a lot in zombies, and you know, your opponent, they're special summoning and all, and you're playing good old zombie world, then Sucker's gonna allow you to keep drawing cards. You know, she's just gonna sit there like little, I don't even, what is she supposed to be? Is she like a streamer or something? She looks like one of those Twitch streamers or something. So, okay, she sits there like a Twitch streamer, just accepting all of the likes and all of the draw power in the world, and you just keep plussing off of her. In terms of actual vampires, though, she's actually a lot better, because, you know, you could literally steal your opponent's stuff by giving them a monster. You get to draw a card, you banish something like your vampire ghost, and then you get an additional normal summon, or you use your domain and get another normal summon. Tribute your opponent's stuff. Summon Shadow Vampire. The stuff of that nature. And Sucker, in terms of just straight up vampires, is good, just for that reason alone. Steals your opponent's stuff while plussing off of it, and just sits there and does her thing. And finally, the penultimate monster of the vampire variety, their final boss for now, is Vampire Fascinator, a Link 3 Dark Zombie with 2500 attack with its arrows in the inverted Y position, which requires 2 or more monsters, including a zombie. And when it's Link summoned, you can target a monster in the opponent's grave and summon it to your field in defense. But you cannot special summon monsters to this turn except for any zombie monster. You can tribute a vampire monster that target a monster your opponent controls and take control of it till the end phase. And you can only use each of these effects once per turn. So, Fascinator's okay. I mean, don't get me wrong, the ability to steal your opponent's stuff from their graveyard and then tribute her off in order to summon another monster from your opponent's graveyard is nothing to scoff at. She's basically, you're using 3 materials to steal 2 materials to make vampire undead, so pluses, I guess? To be fair, though, you could keep Fascinator around for a turn or 2 and tribute your other vampires, such as Familiar or Retainer, in order to steal your opponent's stuff. I guess that's the real intention of this monster. This isn't something that vampires will go into for like a long game thing. This is more of a closer than anything else. It's something you summon when you really just want to just screw with your opponent and steal other stuff. Just be the thief. Be your D&D thief of your dreams and steal everything, Fascinator. That's what you want to do with your life. Go do it. And so we here today say that vampires have had their day. Vampires from their earliest days had a rough start. However, with time and a little bit of love and a little bit of lube, they have become a more proper archetype. Their first line cemented the idea that, yes, vampires can be a cohesive unit. They can come together to form a true coven of the night. That continued on with their second line, giving them the power that they needed to truly, rule the graveyard with that iron fist. Zombies are one of the most powerful types of monsters in the game. There's so many insane zombie cards in this game, so much crazy support for them. And so vampires, I feel, will never be an archetype that needs such a major overhaul as to give them like a boss monster that says all zombies are immune to everything or anything ridiculous like that. They're fine. Vampires, they don't need to be some meta crazy thing. They don't have to be some broken shiz or anything. Vampires are good as they are now. They have had their run. They have a decent number of options to them. Any generic zombie support in the future is just better for vampires in general. So I love the way they sit. They are this hauntingly gothic bunch of lads and lasses that rule the night. They suck on the blood of the living like a bunch of ticks, and they dominate the graveyard, and they dominate the will of the living. And so I am happy with the way vampires look. I'm happy with the way they turned out, and I hope that Konami never tries to ruin them with some crazy gimmick in the future. I think that as they stand, this is exactly how vampires should look. Well, everybody, thank you very much for another episode of Card Talks. This has been really fun. It's always good to look at an old archetype and just say my thoughts on them and, give my words and all that. So stay tuned for, I'll be making a post in the next couple days after this comes out of what archetype will do for Christmas. We'll have some good options there. But for now, thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this. Consider subbing if you haven't, because we're trying to climb all the way to 1,000. That's where we're looking to get someday. So help us get there if you feel generous, feel like donating some blood, something like that. And I'll see you later. Y'all take care. Happy holidays.